While you were scrolling through your phone this morning, something happened that could completely transform the way 1.4 billion people connect to the internet. Africa has just switched on its own internet infrastructure. And this move might be the biggest challenge Google has faced since the day it was founded. This isn't just another tech headline that fades by tomorrow. This moment could mark the beginning of the end for Western tech monopolies. And by the time you hear what's really going on, you'll understand why every major tech CEO is holding emergency meetings right now. Most people assume the internet is one big, unified global system where everyone enjoys equal access. But that's far from reality. What we call the internet is actually a collection of networks, most of them controlled by a handful of Western companies. For the last 2 decades, Africa has been forced to play by their rules. Every click, every search, every bit of data had to pass through servers owned by Google, Amazon, or Microsoft. But that changed forever with the launch of the African Union's Continental Internet Exchange. And this isn't just another internet provider. It's a complete parallel system, an entire infrastructure that bypasses Western-controlled networks. To picture it, imagine Africa building its own highway system instead of constantly paying tolls to drive on roads owned by foreign companies. That's exactly what just happened. Only this time, we're talking about the digital highways that fuel the global economy. Here's what most people don't realize about how the internet really works. When someone in Lagos, Nigeria searches for something on Google, that request doesn't go straight to Google's servers. Instead, it travels across undersea cables, through data centers, and exchange points, most of which are owned by Western corporations. That means African internet traffic often travels thousands of miles to Europe or North America before circling back to Africa. It's basically like mailing a letter to your neighbor, but sending it across the ocean first. And this outdated setup has created three massive problems. It's extremely expensive. Africa pays some of the highest internet costs in the world because it's renting someone else's infrastructure. It's slow and unreliable. Data has to travel absurd distances. It gives Western companies near total control over African digital communications and data. Now here's the game changer. The Continental Internet Exchange doesn't just fix these problems, it rewrites the rules entirely. Instead of routing traffic through Western-owned systems, African internet traffic now stays within Africa. They've built a continent-wide network of data centers, fiber optic cables, and exchange points. If someone in Kenya wants to access a website hosted in South Africa, that data never leaves African soil. The scale of this achievement is staggering. 54 countries working together to design a unified digital infrastructure from the ground up. Over 100,000 kilometers of fiber optic cables laid. 47 major data centers built. Exchange points in every major city. This isn't a small experiment. It's infrastructure that rivals what Google, Amazon, and Microsoft have built over decades. But the real brilliance isn't just the hardware, it's the software. The entire system runs on something called the African Digital Protocol, which isn't compatible with traditional internet protocols. In other words, websites, search engines, and apps built for the Western internet don't automatically work on Africa's internet. It's like they've created their own digital language, and they're the only fluent speakers. This is where Google's nightmare begins. For 20 years, Google has dominated global search because it owned the infrastructure and the protocols. But the African Digital Protocol doesn't use Google's indexing system. Instead, it uses distributed knowledge mapping, a system designed to prioritize African content, languages, and perspectives. Here's an example. If someone searches for African history using the new system, they won't get results filtered by Google's algorithms that typically elevate Western sources. Instead, they'll see information from African universities, researchers, and institutions delivered in local languages and shaped by local context. That might not sound earth-shattering to you, but for Google, it's terrifying. Their empire depends on being the global gateway to information. If 1.4 billion Africans suddenly switch to a search system that serves them better than Google, that's not just lost revenue, it's a direct threat to their dominance. And it doesn't stop with search. The Continental Internet Exchange has rolled out its own email, its own cloud storage, its own video platform, and even its own advertising network. Every service Google offers, Africa has now created its own version, faster, cheaper, and tailored to its people. The economic ripple effects of this shift, absolutely massive. Right now, African countries are spending over $50 billion every year on digital services provided by Western companies. That money leaves the continent and ends up in Silicon Valley, funding shareholders far away. But with the Continental Internet Exchange, all of that money stays in Africa. It flows to African engineers, African data centers, and African technology companies. This is creating a massive economic ripple effect. Every dollar that used to go to Google or Amazon now circulates within local economies, creating jobs, funding research, and building homegrown expertise. Already, African tech companies that struggle to compete with Western giants are thriving because they now have access to infrastructure built specifically for their needs. The timing of this launch isn't random. Africa has the youngest population in the world. Over 60% of the continent is under 25. These are digital natives, born with smartphones and social media, but they've been forced to navigate systems designed for Western users. The Continental Internet Exchange finally gives them tools that reflect their languages, cultures, and daily needs. And the adoption numbers are staggering. In just 3 days since launch, over 200 million Africans have switched to the new system as their primary internet service. That's faster adoption than any platform in history, even Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. Why? Because it simply works better for African users. Google is scrambling, but they've never faced a challenge like this. They can't just buy their way in or copy the system. The African Digital Protocol is open source, but it only works within Africa's new network. To compete, Google would have to build its own parallel internet, a project that would cost hundreds of billions of dollars and take decades. Meanwhile, other regions are watching Africa closely. South America has already announced plans to build its own continental internet inspired by Africa's model. Asian countries are exploring similar strategies. If this trend continues, we may be witnessing the end of a single, globally controlled internet and the rise of regional digital ecosystems that operate independently of Western control. The geopolitical implications are huge. For the first time since the Internet's creation, a major region has achieved true digital sovereignty. African countries are no longer dependent on Western infrastructure, which means they can't be cut off or pressured through sanctions or political influence. This shifts the balance of power in the digital age. What we're seeing could mark the beginning of the post-Google era. For 20 years, Google ruled the internet, but that reign is now under threat. The Continental Internet Exchange proves that there's a better way to organize digital information, one that prioritizes local needs over global monopolies. The real question isn't whether Google will survive this challenge. It's whether they can adapt fast enough to stay relevant in a world where their dominance is no longer guaranteed. Africa has shown the world that the internet doesn't need to be controlled by a handful of Western companies. Other regions are already following their lead, and the age of digital colonialism is coming to an end. This is the story that could define the next decade of technology, And it all started just 3 days ago when Africa decided to take control of its digital destiny. The internet, as we know, it will never be the same. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And make sure to check out our next video on the screen. See you there.